Two carts roll through the checkout line at roughly the same time, at roughly the same grocery store, in roughly the same suburban zip code. The first cart is full of name brand everything. A premium organic juice that costs $9. A box of individually wrapped snack bags, the kind marketed for convenience rather than value. A rotisserie chicken, 3 pre-made meal kits, 3 different specialty cheeses, and a $12 bag of pre-cut fruit that would have cost $4 whole. The total comes to $193 for what amounts to about 4 days of food for a family of 3. The second cart looks almost apologetic by comparison. Dried beans. A 10-pound bag of rice, whole chickens, not parts, not pre-cooked. A modest amount of seasonal produce, a few cans of tomatoes, a block of cheese instead of pre-shredded bags, and a single jar of peanut butter that's noticeably not the brand with the cartoon mascot. The total comes to $81, and it will feed the same size family for almost 2 weeks. If you only looked at these two carts, you'd probably assume something about each family's income. Most people would guess the first cart belongs to someone comfortable, maybe even wealthy, and the second cart belongs to someone struggling. Here's the uncomfortable twist. In study after study on consumer spending behavior, the opposite is far more often true. The first cart is frequently a signal of financial stress, not financial comfort. And the second cart, the unglamorous one, is one of the most consistent behavioral markers researchers find among people who are actually building wealth. Today we're going to look at why your grocery cart might be a more honest financial document than your bank statement, what it's actually measuring underneath the surface, and why this one habit shows up again and again in research on people who build real, lasting financial security. Let's start with why a bank statement lies to you, or at least gives you an incomplete picture. A bank statement shows you a snapshot. It shows balances and transactions, numbers frozen at a single moment. What it doesn't show you is behavior under repetition, the thousands of small decisions, made consistently over months and years, that actually determine whether wealth accumulates or evaporates. Two people can have an identical bank balance on the same Tuesday and be on completely different financial trajectories. Because one of them is about to make 400 small decisions this month that quietly erode that balance, and the other is about to make 400 small decisions that quietly build on it. A grocery cart, it turns out, is one of the purest windows into that pattern of decisions that exists in ordinary life. Nobody is performing for an audience at the grocery store the way they might with a car or a vacation photo. There's no social reward for an impressive cart. Almost nobody posts pictures of their groceries, which means the choices made in that cart are some of the most unfiltered financial behavior a person exhibits all week, made dozens of times a year, every single year, compounding in a way that a single large purchase never could. Here's the first pattern researchers consistently find: convenience markup tolerance. Every item in that first cart, the pre-cut fruit, the individually wrapped snacks, the rotisserie chicken instead of a whole raw one, carries a convenience premium, sometimes 30%, sometimes over 100%, above the cost of the same food in a slightly less convenient form. None of these purchases are irrational in isolation. Pre-cut fruit saves 5 minutes. A rotisserie chicken saves 30. The problem isn't any single transaction. It's what happens when convenience markup becomes the default operating mode rather than an occasional choice, because the premium doesn't show up once. It compounds weekly, 52 times a year, for as long as the habit persists. A family paying an average convenience premium of $40 a week on groceries, a conservative estimate once you account for pre-cut produce, ready meals, and the small format snack culture, is looking at roughly $2,080 a year. Invested instead of spent, at a historical average market return over 20 years, that single habit difference becomes approximately $95,000. The chicken itself was never the issue. The pattern of always choosing the version of food that requires the least thought is the issue, because that same pattern, the path of least resistance default, shows up in how the same person handles a subscription renewal, a slightly too expensive apartment, or an investment decision they didn't feel like researching. The second pattern is what researchers sometimes call planning horizon, and it's visible in the second cart in a way that's almost too on the nose. Dried beans require planning. They need to be soaked, cooked, and incorporated into a meal you decided on in advance. A whole chicken requires you to know you'll be home to roast it, and probably to plan 2 or 3 additional meals around using the leftovers efficiently. Rice in bulk only makes sense if you're confident you'll be cooking regularly enough to use it before it goes stale in your pantry psychology, even if it never literally expires. Every item in that cart assumes a future. It assumes the person buying it expects to be cooking, eating at home, and managing a kitchen with some consistency over the coming weeks, not just getting through tonight. This matters because financial security is, at its core, a planning horizon problem. People who consistently build wealth are making decisions today based on a clear mental model of next month, next year, and next decade. People who struggle financially, regardless of income level, often make decisions optimized entirely for the next few hours or the next single day. Because the longer horizon either feels too uncertain to plan for or too uncomfortable to look at directly. The grocery cart doesn't cause this planning horizon. It reveals it, transaction by transaction, in a context low stakes enough that people aren't even aware they're broadcasting it. There's a third pattern that's slightly more subtle: substitution flexibility. The second cart buyer typically has a rotating, flexible relationship with what specific foods they buy, built around what's in season, what's on sale, and what's currently cheap relative to alternatives. The first cart buyer often has a fixed mental list, the same brands, the same products, regardless of price changes. Because the habit itself has become the default rather than a series of active choices. Researchers studying price elasticity find something consistent here. People with more financial flexibility overall tend to have more substitution flexibility specifically, while people experiencing financial stress often grip tighter to familiar brand choices, partly as a psychological anchor in an otherwise unstable situation. The irony is that this gripping behavior, reaching for the familiar premium brand specifically because everything else feels uncertain, is itself part of what perpetuates the instability. Let's talk about why this happens, because it's not really about grocery knowledge or cooking skill. It's almost entirely about decision fatigue and time scarcity, which are themselves often symptoms of financial stress rather than separate issues. Someone working 2 jobs, or one demanding job with a long commute, genuinely has less bandwidth at the end of the day to cook beans from scratch. And the convenience premium starts to feel less like a luxury and more like a survival tax on an already overextended schedule. This is where the relationship between groceries and net worth gets more nuanced than simple judgment. The pre-cut fruit isn't a moral failing, but it is, statistically, a marker, the financial equivalent of a fever, not the disease itself, but a measurable symptom of underlying conditions, usually time scarcity. Financial anxiety reducing planning capacity, or both feeding each other in a loop that's difficult to interrupt from the grocery aisle alone. This is precisely why the grocery cart predicts net worth more reliably in research than people expect. It's not measuring willpower or frugality as a personality trait. It's measuring, almost by accident, whether someone currently has the bandwidth, the planning horizon, and the psychological stability to make decisions oriented toward a future version of themselves, rather than just getting through the immediate moment. And that exact capacity, the ability to consistently choose for your future self over your present convenience, is the single clearest behavioral predictor of wealth accumulation across virtually every category of financial decision, not just food. Consider how directly this maps onto other financial behaviors. Someone with the planning horizon to soak beans the night before also tends to be the kind of person who sets up automatic retirement contributions instead of manually deciding to invest each month. Someone with the substitution flexibility to buy whatever produce is cheapest. That week also tends to be the kind of person who refinances a loan when rates drop instead of staying on autopilot with a worse rate out of inertia. Someone who tolerates convenience markups on groceries because today feels too overwhelming to plan around also tends to carry a revolving credit card balance. Not because they don't understand interest, but because the same bandwidth constraint that makes pre-cut fruit appealing makes a 30-second tap of a credit card appealing too, every single time. In dozens of categories beyond food. None of this means buying a rotisserie chicken occasionally dooms your finances, any more than the existence of grocery delivery means everyone using it is destined for poverty. The research isn't about individual purchases. It's about default patterns repeated without examination, the same insight that shows up in nearly every category of consumer behavior research, that the small, frequent, low-attention decisions shape long-term outcomes far more than the occasional large, deliberate ones, because frequency beats magnitude when compounding is involved. So what does this actually mean if you recognize your own cart in the first description rather than the second? It doesn't mean swearing off convenience entirely or moralizing your way into bean-soaking guilt. It means recognizing that the grocery cart is a low-stakes practice ground for a much larger skill, the skill of choosing your future self over your present convenience, repeatedly in small ways, until it becomes the default rather than the exception. Start by noticing, just noticing without judgment, which category of items in your own cart falls into convenience premium territory versus planning required territory. That awareness alone, the same kind of awareness that works in nearly every other financial habit, tends to shift behavior simply by making an invisible pattern visible. The real lesson buried in the grocery cart research isn't about food at all. It's about the fact that wealth isn't actually built in the big visible decisions, the house, the car, the investment account. It's built and eroded in thousands of small, boring, repeated choices that nobody photographs, nobody posts, and almost nobody examines closely enough to notice the pattern. Until researchers started looking at exactly that pattern and found it sitting quietly in something as unremarkable as a grocery cart, rolling through checkout on an ordinary Tuesday.